But every few minutes, soft, slow, and full of something I couldn't name, like grief or warning. Eventually, I found the inn, a faded sign above the door, half cracked and hanging low. The gallows end, I stepped inside. The door didn't creak. It clicked. A single desk, a staircase, dust everywhere, and something hanging in the air that reminded me of old paper and candle smoke. Behind the desk sat a woman, middle-aged, hair tied back, pale as salt. She looked up when I entered, not surprised, not welcoming, just aware. "You're early," she said. I hesitated. "Early?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stood, turned, and reached under the desk. When she came back up, she held a key. "Room 3. Without asking, she handed it to me. "You'll hear them soon," she said. "The bells?" She paused. "Number the others." I didn't ask who. I don't think I wanted to know. The room was clean but cold. Stone walls, wooden floor, a small bed with a heavy quilt. No electricity. Just a lantern already lit, as if she'd known I was coming. I closed the door, sat on the bed, listened. And after a while, I heard them. Not the bells, whispers, dozens of them. Through the walls, the floor, the air itself. Not words I could make out, just the sound of breath shaped like secrets. I lay down fully dressed. I tried to ignore the noise, but when the bell rang again, much louder now, so loud the window shook, I saw something standing just outside the glass, a figure too tall, its arms too long, its head cocked like it was trying to understand me, or remember me. And when the bell rang a second time, it lifted one long finger and pointed directly at me. I didn't sleep, not even for a second. The lantern never flickered. But at some point, I realized there was something carved into the wood beneath my bed. I reached down and ran my fingers across the letters. 7 words, deep and frantic. "Don't stay past the 3rd bell." I stared at them until the sun rose, but even in daylight the fog never left, and the humming had returned. Only now it was louder, and it was inside the walls. The morning after the 2nd bell, the fog still hadn't lifted. It pressed against the window like something trying to get in, or keep me from seeing out. Cold light filtered through the lace curtains, dim and colorless. The world beyond the glass looked like the inside of a lung. Everything in Gallowmere seemed suspended, not dead, not alive. Paused. I didn't open the window. Instead, I tested the door. It wasn't locked anymore. I stepped into the hall, half expecting to see someone waiting. Another whisper. Another scratched warning on the wall. But it was empty. And yet, the air hummed faintly. Not the vibration from last night. This was different. Rhythmic. Like a breath. A pulsing, drawn-out inhale that never seemed to end. I descended the stairs slowly. Every creak of the old steps echoed too long, like the sound was bouncing off more than wood and stone. The front desk was empty. The fire in the hearth had burned down to red embers. A pot of something sat untouched on the side table. Porridge, maybe, still steaming faintly. Whoever had made it was gone, or watching. I stepped outside, and that's when I noticed it. The street was wrong. Buildings had moved. I remembered the blacksmith shop being directly across from the inn. Now it was further down, nestled beside what looked like a gutted church. The alley I'd used the night before was gone, replaced by a row of sagging homes with boarded windows and rusted lanterns. The fog hung thick in the air, still, unmoving, like a shroud waiting to drop. And above it all, the sky was pale gray, empty of sun, empty of birds, like the world beyond Gallowmere had stopped spinning. I walked. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd find a map, or someone to answer questions. Maybe I thought I could make sense of what I'd seen. But more than anything, I felt pulled. Not physically, not by sound or scent, by awareness, like the town had noticed me now, and it wanted me to see something. I followed a narrow, sloped path out of the main street. It wound between buildings I didn't recognize. Many of them caved in, overgrown as if they'd been burned out and left to rot decades ago. Beyond them, I found the cemetery. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't fenced. It was just there, laid out in a shallow basin of land behind the town. Hundreds of gravestones arranged in spirals, concentric rings, all pointing toward a central monument I couldn't quite see from the edge. I hesitated, then stepped in. The path underfoot was packed dirt and scattered gravel, but the air felt soft, like I was walking into something that didn't want to be disturbed. The gravestones were ancient, worn smooth by rain and wind. Most of them bore no names, only marks, symbols carved in deep relief. I crouched to examine one, a perfect circle surrounded by sharp, jagged lines, almost like a sun with broken rays. Beneath it, a short inscription, "Hello again, and welcome to the Night Reader. I hope you're somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. I hope the blinds are drawn, and the wind outside is just enough to remind you that the world is still turning, even if tonight's tale might make you wish it would stop." Tonight's story is not one I tell lightly. It comes from a place where the air tastes wrong, where the trees don't sway with the wind but shiver like they've heard something you haven't yet. It's about a town that once tried to silence its past. But some things don't stay buried. Some things ring louder after death. This is the story of Gallowmere, and it begins on a forgotten stretch of highway, just after dusk, with me, driving alone and not quite sure why I'd taken the exit. Let me go back. I'd been visiting my uncle in the state hospital, a place where the walls are too white and the staff too kind, like they're afraid you'll notice the smell of bleach and secrets. He hadn't spoken in months, not since the night they found him wandering barefoot on Route 77, blood under his fingernails and mud packed deep in the lines of his palms. No memory of where he'd been, just a single word repeated over and over. Gallowmere. It wasn't a town, not one I could find anyway. No record of it on any map, not even a misspelled entry on a backwater forum. A few weeks after that visit, I received a package. No return address. Inside, a black notebook, old and leather-bound. My uncle's name etched inside the cover in fading gold. Every page filled with cramped, jittery handwriting. Ink smudged, sentences crossing over each other, margins crawling with symbols that looked etched rather than drawn. I spent 2 nights reading it, and on the third, I started dreaming of bells, ringing far away, getting closer. By the time I got behind the wheel, I wasn't entirely sure if I was being pulled or driven. The highway felt wrong in a familiar way. The trees looked too still. Even the crows that usually haunted the posts and wires were gone. I wasn't far out of the city when the GPS went silent. Not glitched, not lost signal, just silent. The screen stayed on. The map froze. And then the voice spoke. Just once. Not the usual cheerful AI voice. Number this was something old, creaking like a rusted hinge. Turn left. That was it. A single command. There wasn't even a left turn visible. But then I saw it. A narrow gravel path veering off into the woods, half covered in moss and shadow. No signage, no tire tracks. Still my hands turned the wheel, like they weren't entirely mine. The trees swallowed me almost immediately. The further I drove, the more the world narrowed. No phone signal, no radio. Just the sound of tires over loose gravel, and beneath that, something else. A hum. Low. Constant. Like metal under pressure, or a distant sustained note struck on an old piano. It vibrated in my teeth, made my vision shimmer at the edges. I should have turned around, but something wouldn't let me. The road twisted like a serpent, slithering deeper into the woods, and just when I thought it might loop forever, it opened into a clearing. That's when I saw it. A gate. Huge. Iron. Covered in vines so thick they looked like veins. There was no town behind it, at least not visibly. Just mist. Low and heavy. Unmoving. A rusted sign hung crooked on one hinge. Gallowmere, founded 1823. Dissolved 1901, dissolved. Not abandoned. Not burned or evacuated. Dissolved. Like it was a contract. Or a curse. I stepped out of the car. The air felt tired. Not stale, not rotten. Just used. Like the forest had been holding its breath for too long. I moved closer to the gate. There was no lock. Just a chain, barely looped around the bars. I didn't mean to touch it, but the moment I did, something changed. The hum stopped, and I heard something else. A bell, far away. One long, mournful ring. Then nothing. I pushed the gate. It opened with less effort than I expected. The sound it made, metal on stone, was the kind of sound that never stops echoing in your head once you've heard it. I walked forward. And just like that, I was in Gallowmere. The fog didn't lift, but it thinned enough to see the outlines of buildings, timber and stone, warped by time and neglect. Roofs slouched like tired old men. Windows stared like empty eyes. And yet, everything was intact. No collapsed walls, no signs of fire or violence, just decay frozen mid-process, like someone pressed pause on time itself. The street was lined with lampposts made of black iron, each topped with a frosted glass orb. None were lit, but they hummed faintly, like tuning forks held just behind the ear. I didn't know where to go, so I walked. The silence wasn't complete. I heard tiny things. Wood creaking, wind fluttering something unseen, the faint shuffle of leaves despite no breeze. And always, under it all, the distant ring of a bell. Not in rhythm, not in any pattern I could understand. He heard it once. Another stone showed a different symbol, an inverted triangle with 3 vertical slashes inside it. Beneath that, she answered before it called. Others were even stranger. Crude figures with hollow faces. Diagrams that looked more mathematical than spiritual. One stone had no markings at all, just a hole where the name should have been. And still, the pull continued, toward the center, where the monument waited. It was taller than I expected, 15, maybe 20 feet. Black stone, shaped like a tower with no windows. At the top, a bell, green with age, rim streaked with something that might have been rust. Or something else. There were no ropes, no mechanism to ring it. But as I approached, I realized I had heard it before. Last night. Twice. Carved around the base of the monument were dozens of names. These were not like the others. These were human, and I knew one of them. I didn't know how I knew it, but I did. It was mine. My full name, freshly cut. No dust in the grooves, no weathering, just clean stone. I stepped back. My throat tightened. Then I saw the others. 3 figures, barefoot, silent, emerging from the mist on the far side of the cemetery. They walked slowly, reverently. Each carried something wrapped in cloth. They approached the base of the bell tower, then knelt. Unwrapped what they carried. Bodies. Pale. Still. But breathing. Barely. The figures placed the bodies in a triangle at the base of the tower, then stood in unison and raised their arms. The bell rang. Once, but I didn't see it move. The sound came from everywhere. Inside my bones. Behind my eyes. The breathing bodies convulsed. One of them, closest to me, opened his eyes. They were empty. Black as coal. No whites, no irises, just void. He looked directly at me and smiled. Then began to speak in a voice that wasn't his. A voice that was layered, like multiple speakers chanting at once. We hear the third. We come. We answer. We ring. We are. The bell rang again. Twice, the wind shifted, the fog moved, and the sky darkened, not like clouds rolling in, like a hand was closing over the sun. The three figures who had placed the bodies turned and vanished into the mist, but the corpses remained, no longer breathing, but not dead, not anymore. They began to rise. I ran, not toward the town, toward the woods, away from the path, away from the names on the stones. The fog chased me, licking at my heels, curling around trees like fingers. I didn't stop until I reached a clearing I didn't remember passing through before. A dry well stood at the center, covered with rotting boards. A small plaque was nailed into the stone rim. Here sleeps the first to ring. I leaned over the well and listened. At first, silence. Then, faintly, breathing. Slow, ragged, wet. I backed away. Something scratched inside the stone. Then I heard the third bell, not with my ears, with my blood. It rang inside me. Every bone in my body vibrated. Every nerve screamed. I collapsed to my knees, and I remembered. A dream. Weeks ago, before my uncle went silent, before the notebook, before the road, I was in a field, kneeling at a grave, digging. Not with tools, with my hands, fingers raw, nails gone, the earth parting like wet paper. And buried beneath, a box. Inside, a bell. Small, perfect, covered in carvings I couldn't read. And I rang it 3 times. I'd already answered the call. Long before I stepped into Gallowmere, I had invited it in, and now it was coming to collect. The bell didn't stop. Even as I ran, even as the trees bent away like they didn't want to touch me, the sound followed. Not in waves, not fading with distance. It was constant, buried in the marrow of my bones. A resonance that didn't care about distance. The third bell had rung, and now everything had changed. When I stumbled back toward the town, or where the town had been, there was no town anymore. No buildings, no inn, no street, just fog, and the outlines of things that felt wrong to look at for too long. Shapes that didn't make sense, edges that didn't hold still. Once, I thought I saw a steeple floating in the air, upside down, spinning slowly. But when I blinked, it was gone. I wasn't in Gallowmere anymore. Or maybe I was. Maybe Gallowmere had shed its skin and shown me what it really was. I don't know how long I wandered. The fog warped everything. Space, time, sound. I started to think I was walking in circles, but I never saw the same thing twice. I passed statues with no heads, trees shaped like bent torsos, doorways that led into nothing but black, and always the sound of bells. Not just one now, many, dozens, some near, some impossibly far, some too deep to be above ground. I thought I was losing my mind until I heard something familiar. A voice, not whispering, not chanting, speaking, clear, human. You shouldn't be here. I turned. A figure stood just outside the reach of the nearest tree, cloaked, hooded, not tall, not short, wooden, but the frame pulsed like something was breathing behind it. I raised the key. My hand shook. I pushed it into the lock, turned. Click. The door swung open. Inside, a room of mirrors, dozens, all showing me, but not me now. Versions, older, younger, twisted, lost, and in the center of them all, the fourth bell, small, silver, perfect. I stepped toward it. It rang without being touched. Once, then again, then again. Faster now, faster. The mirrors cracked, the world bent, and everything went dark. The sound didn't stop when the darkness came. It wasn't silence, not exactly. It was a hum beneath hearing, a vibration below thought, like the world had dipped under black water and was still ringing, but too deep to follow. I was still in the room. The mirrors had shattered, or melted. I couldn't tell. Where they once stood were now doorways, tall, thin cracks in space, each one flickering like static, showing glimpses of impossible things. A sun that bled, a sky with no stars, forests that pulsed like lungs. The fourth bell was in the center, still ringing, softly, endlessly. It didn't sound like a chime anymore. It sounded like a heartbeat. I should have left. But there was no door anymore. Just the mirrors, just the cracks, just the bell, and me. I stepped forward, not entirely by choice. My legs moved like they belonged to someone else. I reached out, and the moment my fingers brushed the bell, the sound stopped, and the world fell open. I wasn't in the room anymore. I was beneath it, not in a basement, not in a cellar, in something far, far older, something deeper than earth. The floor was stone, wet, covered in symbols I couldn't read but had seen before, on the graves, in the fog, in the book my uncle had left behind. Above me, nothing, no ceiling, just endless dark. The only light came from the lines in the floor, pale veins of greenish glow, like lightning frozen in glass. I stood. Behind me, the bell floated, suspended in air, still ringing. I turned away from it and walked forward, down a corridor that hadn't been there before. Every few feet, a new sound echoed through the tunnel, metal dragging, water dripping, something scratching at something harder than stone. I didn't want to see what made the sounds, but curiosity or madness pushed me on. Eventually, the corridor opened into a chamber, circular, domed, and in the center a table. At least it looked like a table, carved of bone or something close to it. Smooth and long, stained. On top of it were bells, hundreds of them, no two alike. Some small and brass, some made of wood, some shaped like skulls or hands or open mouths. They all vibrated faintly, humming with memory, not of the past, but of possible futures. And behind them, seated in a tall chair of rusted iron, the ringer. It wasn't human. It wore a body, yes, something stitched together from many pieces. Long arms, no face, a robe of red thread and funeral cloth. It did not move, but it knew I was there. "You did not ring," it said. Its voice came from the air, from inside my head. "I didn't want to," I said. "You came to Gallowmere." "I didn't know." "You answered." "I didn't mean to." The bells on the table shifted slightly. One fell over, another began to crack. "You are unfinished," the ringer said. "Unchosen. Then let me go." "You may." I hesitated. "What's the cost?" The ringer raised one long hand. A bell rose from the table, black glass wrapped in silver wire. "This is your sound," it said. "You will carry it with you." "For how long?" The ringer didn't answer. Instead, the bell floated toward me. I didn't reach for it, but it settled in my palm, cold, weightless. And then it disappeared into my hand, into my skin, like it had become part of me. The ringer stood, the chamber darkened, and all the bells fell silent. "You may leave," it said, "but the sound will follow." I woke up back in the inn, in my bed, fully clothed. The light outside was brighter, real sunlight for the first time since I'd arrived. For a moment, I thought it had been a dream, until I looked at my hand. A small mark was burned into my palm, a circle with 3 jagged lines inside, the bell's symbol, and from far off, beyond the window, beyond the hills, I could still hear it, ringing, very faint, but constant. I packed my things. The woman at the desk didn't speak as I passed. She just nodded once, and as I opened the front door, she called after me, "You'll know when to come back." I didn't answer. I stepped into the morning sun and found the road waiting for me, clean, dry, gravel crunching under my shoes like it never had before. My car sat at the edge of the lot. I opened the door and froze. On the passenger seat was the leather-bound notebook, my uncle's, but the pages were blank now, all except one, the final page. It read, "The fourth bell was not the last. It was the first of the real ones. They are waking. We are the echo now. You too." I drove. I didn't stop until I reached the city. My phone worked again. Time had moved normally, though I felt like years had passed. At night, I tried to sleep, but I couldn't, because in my dreams, the bell kept ringing, and each time I heard it, something answered. Something that wasn't me. I lasted 3 days in the city. 3 days of pretending things were normal. 3 days of smiling at coworkers who looked at me like I'd been carved out and filled with static. 3 nights of lying in bed, trying to sleep while the bell hummed in the back of my skull like a mosquito trapped in bone. I couldn't eat. I couldn't dream without waking up soaked in sweat, heart racing, hearing whispers I couldn't unhear. On the 4th day, I started bleeding from my ears. Not much. Just a thin line, but enough. That's when I knew the sound wasn't staying in me anymore. It was leaking. The bell mark on my palm, once faint, had darkened. The skin around it itched constantly, no matter how much I washed, no matter how tightly I wrapped it. Sometimes I thought it was pulsing. The city didn't feel safe. Not from them. Not from me. I don't know how I ended up at the old train station. It was closed. Had been for years. Boarded up windows, signs warning of asbestos and unstable flooring. But the doors weren't locked. They opened at my touch, and inside, silence. Not the kind you get in a dead place. Expectant silence. Like something had stopped breathing just to hear me better. I walked the length of the platform. The dust was undisturbed. No footprints, no animals, no time. At the end, past the broken vending machines and shattered schedule board, there was a single bench. On it, a book, not old, new, bound in white leather. I picked it up. Inside, only 2 pages written. The first, "The 5th bell is not for you." The second, "But you will hear it all the same." Behind me, a train whistle blew. But there were no trains, only tracks overgrown with weeds and thyme. I turned. There it was, a train, black, still, no lights in the windows, no number on the engine, no sound, except for the faint groaning of metal, cooling. It hadn't arrived. It had been there all along, waiting for me to notice. The door opened. No conductor, no passengers, just fog, spilling out from between the seats like breath from something recently fed. I stepped inside. Not because I wanted to, because I had no other option. The moment I crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut, and the train began to move. There are places that exist only in motion. That was the thought that came to me as I sat in that train, watching the world outside blur into colors that didn't belong to any season or geography. The windows showed forests that twisted toward the sky like smoke, rivers that ran uphill, stars spinning too fast in the daylight. There were no stops. There was no conductor. But I was not alone. At first, I thought the other passengers were statues. They didn't move, didn't blink. Dozens of them, sitting in perfect silence, faces pale and slack, eyes closed. Each one marked, some on the palm, like me, others on the neck, the chest, the throat, bell marks, burned into the skin, some fresh, some raw and bleeding, others so old they'd become part of the body. No one looked at me, but I could feel them listening, as if their ears were always open, for something or someone. After what felt like hours, the train slowed. It didn't stop. It drifted. And outside the window, Gallowmere. But not the town I remembered. This was deeper, older, a shadow of Gallowmere, like a painting beneath the paint. The streets moved when you looked away. The houses sighed when the wind passed over them. Trees bloomed upside down, their roots tangled in the sky. We drifted past it slowly, and from somewhere within it, the fifth bell rang. The train stopped, and the passengers stood, all at once, not with awareness, with purpose. They filed out, one by one. No words, no breath, just movement. I followed, not because I chose to, because it was expected. The place we entered wasn't a station. It was a wake. A vast hall carved from the stone beneath the town, lit by hanging lanterns filled with still-burning insects, walls lined with alcoves, each holding something preserved in glass, teeth, tongues, fingers, and at the center, a pit, circular, shallow, filled with water that wasn't water, thick, black, pulsing like a heart. The others formed a circle around it and began to chant. Not words, names, not theirs, mine, over and over, dozens of mouths, all saying my name like a prayer, or a curse, or both. The water pulsed harder. Something rose from it. Not a person, not an object, a presence, like the silhouette of a thought made flesh. It stared at me with a face that was mine, and not mine. It raised its hand, and in its palm, a bell, cracked, blood dripping from its center like oil. It didn't give it to me. It crushed it. And when it did, they screamed, all of them. The passengers, the watchers, the ones who had brought me here, not in pain, in rage, their mouths opened too wide, their eyes bled black, and they came for me. I ran, through a hallway that bent and stretched and screamed as I passed, through rooms filled with fog that whispered things and voices I recognized, my uncle, my mother, a version of myself I hadn't been yet, through a corridor of bells all ringing at once, so loud I thought my skull would split. I burst through a door and found myself back in the inn. The fire was out. The woman was gone. And on the floor, the white leather book. Its pages were no longer blank. Dozens of entries now, all names. Everyone crossed out. All but one. Mine. Underneath it, a new message. You survived the fifth. Most don't. But the next one is the bell that names you. I woke the next morning with a new mark, not on my palm, on my tongue. When I touched it, it stung like acid. And in the mirror, I saw something move behind my reflection. Just a flicker. But it smiled. And I heard a voice I thought I'd forgotten, my uncle's. We don't die in Gallowmere. We change, and we ring, and we wake. The sixth bell is coming. And when it does, it won't be me that hears it. It'll be you. I didn't leave the inn for 2 days. The fire never relit. The windows stayed dark. The fog pressed harder against the glass now, less like weather, more like intent. Like it was watching me, learning the shape of my breath. I didn't hear bells anymore. I felt them, inside my bones, in the twitch of my eyelids, in the ache of my back teeth. Something was waiting, and I had no idea what it wanted. On the third day, the woman at the desk returned. She didn't knock. She didn't speak. She stood in the doorway of my room, her dress soaked with something that didn't look like water. Her skin was paler now, so pale it looked stretched over porcelain. Her eyes were wrong, too wide, no whites, only black, rimmed in blood. You're marked, she said. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her. I didn't ask to be. No one does. What happens now? She stepped further into the room, and with each movement I could hear something soft and wet shifting inside her limbs, like there were strings being pulled by hands that didn't belong to her. You've heard 5, she said. I nodded. Her mouth twisted into something like a smile. That's one more than most. What is the 6th? She tilted her head. The bell that names. Names what? You. What you are now. I stood. I'm still me. No, she said gently. You're what you've become. I opened my mouth to argue. But something stopped me. A memory, buried deep. The reflection in the inn mirror the night before. It had smiled at me. And I hadn't smiled. There was a lag, like whatever was inside the glass was waiting for permission, or trying to remember how to be me. The woman reached into her apron and pulled something out. A ribbon. Black. Tied in a neat loop. She offered it to me. "What is this?" "To cover your tongue." I didn't take it. She dropped it on the floor. "You'll want it," she said. "When the naming comes, you'll want it more than anything." Then she turned and walked back into the dark hallway. And for the first time since I arrived in Gallowmere, I heard no footsteps. The 6th bell rang at 3:33 a.m. I know this because I woke from a dream I couldn't remember. Sweating through my clothes, the taste of rust on my tongue. The air in the room was vibrating, the walls seemed to shiver, the flame in the lantern burned black for a moment before dying entirely. Then, gong. The sound didn't end, it unfolded like a scream stretched over centuries, and somewhere in the distance I heard the sound of doors unlocking. Not just the inn. Every door. Outside, Gallowmere was alive. Not the way towns are alive, not in the way of people and motion and routine. Alive like a thing that breathes through the lungs of its dead. The buildings had moved again, but now they were closer, tighter, squeezing in toward the town center, which pulsed with a light that had no source. Just a dull, greenish glow seeping from beneath the cobblestones, as if the town itself had cracked open like an egg. I wasn't alone. Figures moved through the streets. Some walked on 2 legs. Some didn't. Some wore their old faces. Others had lost the idea of a face altogether. They didn't look at me, not because they couldn't, because they recognized me. They nodded as I passed. One reached out to touch my arm, not with malice, but with familiarity. Like an old friend checking to see if I still remembered their name. I didn't. I reached the town center. The fountain was gone. In its place, a stone archway, 10 feet high, carved from something darker than obsidian. It didn't reflect light. It drank it. Above the arch was a phrase, etched in letters that crawled when I looked at them too long. I blinked. The words twisted into something I could read. "Here are named the ones who cannot return." Beneath the arch, a staircase led down. Stone, wet, carved with hundreds of bells, each unique, each ringing in silence. I descended. The tunnel opened into a chamber larger than the town itself could contain. Ceiling lost in shadow, walls lined with alcoves, and in the center, the well of naming. It wasn't water. It wasn't even liquid. It was light, suspended in a pool that didn't ripple. Above it, something floated. Not quite a person. Not quite a god. A presence shaped like authority itself. It spoke without sound. "You are the echo." My mark burned. "You are the breath between bells." I dropped to my knees. "You will be named, and in naming you will become." I wanted to scream, but the moment I opened my mouth, the tongue mark flared, and something pushed up from beneath it. Something hard, sharp. A bell, inside me, rising, climbing my throat like a hand with too many fingers. I reached for the ribbon the woman had left. It was gone. I screamed, and when I did, the bell came free, fell to the stone, and rang. The 6th bell. It was my voice, but it wasn't my name. It was what I was, a caller, one who rings, not for guidance, for summoning. The chamber shook. The well of light collapsed into black, and from the walls, they came. Hundreds, thousands, the named, the silenced, the twisted, each bearing a bell of their own, each staring with the same message. "Welcome. You are one of us now." I woke on the floor of my room, throat raw, mouth dry. On the bedside table sat a bell, small, silver, its shape like a curled tongue. My name no longer appeared in the book downstairs. Instead, there was a new name, Caller 331. Underneath it, Await the 7th. The naming is not the end, only the price of entry. The bell on my bedside table didn't move, but it pulsed. Not with sound, but presence, like a sleeping heart that had learned the shape of my thoughts. When I touched it, it was warm. When I tried to look away, I couldn't. It knew me. Not my face, not my name. It knew the inside of me, every thought I hadn't spoken, every shadow I'd swallowed, and every moment I'd almost wrung it already without realizing. It was made for me, and somehow I understood it would never leave me now. I was Caller 331, whatever that meant. I didn't ring it. Not yet. But I kept it in my pocket as I left the room. Downstairs, the inn was full. For the first time since I'd arrived, the common room held people. They looked almost normal, tired, weathered, some with twitching fingers or eyes too wide, or movements just a beat off from what you'd expect. But they were talking, eating, moving with purpose. Each one had a bell around their neck, waist, or wrist. None of the bells looked the same, but they all looked alive. The woman behind the desk was there again. This time she didn't pretend. Her skin had cracked at the edges. Her smile was painted on, literally, like it had been carved and inked with something not from this world. "You've been named," she said. I nodded. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. A list, numbered, hundreds of entries, everyone crossed out, except for mine. Next to it, written in tight, scratchy ink. First summoning pending. Do not resist. I looked at her. What am I calling? She tilted her head slowly. Not what, she said. Who? That night, the summoning came. Not with fanfare. Not with thunder or blood or fire. It came with a knock. 3 soft taps on my window, even though I was on the 2nd floor. I didn't open it. I didn't move. But the window opened on its own. And outside, standing on the nothing that passed for a ledge, was a boy. No older than 10. Pale, barefoot, his mouth stitched shut with silver thread, his eyes wide and bright. He held out a hand. In it, a piece of paper. I took it. It had no writing, just a mark. The same one burned into my palm, now inked in blood. As I looked back up, the boy was gone. The wind shifted, and the bell in my pocket grew heavier, hotter, until I couldn't ignore it anymore. I took it out, and without even meaning to, I rang it. Software, a single tiny chime, but it tore the room in half. The walls peeled like paper. The bed caught fire, black flame that made no light, and in the middle of the room a doorway opened, wide, circular, lined with bone and lined again with something deeper than bone. From the other side, I saw nothing at first, just fog, but then movement, not fast, not threatening, just certain. A shape stepped through, 7 feet tall, wrapped in burial cloth, hands bound at the wrist by a silver chain. Where its face should have been, there was only a mirror, but not of the room, of me, always me. It knelt, bowed its head, waited. I stepped closer. Who are you? I whispered. The thing lifted one chained hand and pointed at my chest, at the mark. It was mine, my reflection. It had been made from me, and I had brought it back. Not from the dead, not from another place, from what I left behind when I stepped into Gallowmere. My fear, my failure, my silent promise to answer the bells when no one else would. The creature stood, and without a sound, walked to the far side of the room and vanished through the wall like it had never been there. Only the mirror face remained for a few seconds longer, staring at me, and then it too was gone. The next morning, the innkeeper handed me another slip of paper. This one was longer. It read, "You have completed your first call. You have split yourself. That is the price. You will do it again. Every caller begins this way. Every caller ends hollow." I stayed in Gallowmere because there was no point pretending I could leave. I didn't try to run, didn't ask where the roads went, because I already knew. They looped. They fed back. They took you where you needed to be, not where you wanted. The townspeople spoke to me now, not like neighbors, like colleagues. Each had been named once. Each had made their call. Some bore dozens of bells. Some bore none, because they'd passed them on. Transferred the burden to strangers, to travelers, to people who had heard just a faint echo of the first bell and wandered too close. That's how Gallowmere survives. Not on offerings, on echoes, reflections. People like me, caller of the bound, summoner of the forgotten, a new echo among old bells. That night, I stood in the cemetery again. The gravestones had changed. They always do. They always match the town's needs. I found one freshly carved. No name, just the bell symbol. And beneath it, 331. First call made. Second call. Pending. I asked the question I hadn't dared ask before, out loud, to the fog, to the stone, to the bell pulsing in my hand. What happens after the seventh? The air didn't answer, but the ground beneath the gravestone moved, like something was shifting. Breathing, waiting. Back at the inn, I sat in front of the fire. The others were there too, callers, watchers, named and named again. One of them leaned over to me, a woman with no lips, only teeth, and said, "You called well." "Thanks," I said numbly. She laughed, a dry, cracking sound. "You'll get worse at it." I thought I was supposed to get better. "No," she said, smiling too wide. "No one gets better at calling. They just get emptier." She handed me a coin. It wasn't currency. It was a bell, flattened, pressed, the surface scarred with hundreds of names that had been crossed out, except one. Mine. 331. "I thought I was alone," I whispered. Her smile died. "You are." I kept the coin. I don't know why. It wasn't a gift. Nothing in Gallowmere ever is. Everything you're handed here comes with a hook, a piece of yourself strung through the eyelet, dangling quietly until it's time to tug. But I didn't throw it away either. Maybe because I needed the weight, or maybe because some part of me already knew I was going to become one of the names etched into its surface. Caller 331. No longer a number, no longer just an echo, now a fixed point in the sound. And the sound was changing. I noticed it 2 days after my first call. The bells didn't stop ringing. They didn't grow louder. They became wrong, out of rhythm, off pitch. Some of them stuttered mid-chime like they were choking on their own tones. Others stretched their sounds too long, warping into cries that only partially belonged to bells. Gallowmere reacted. The buildings twisted more frequently, sometimes right in front of my eyes. Streets led into themselves. Signs changed language. And the fog? It was thicker now, hungry. At night, it scratched at the windows with fingers made of silence. That's when the echoes began. Not the whispers. I'd lived with those since the first bell. These were forms, reflections of the bound, the called, people who had been torn by their own summoning and left unfinished. Half real, half memory. They wandered the town like shadows that couldn't forget how to wear skin. I saw the first one outside the blacksmith's forge. It wore the shape of a man I didn't know, but something about him was wrong. His mouth didn't move when he spoke, but I heard him clearly. She rang me twice, then buried the bell. I've been ringing ever since. He looked at me like he knew what I was, what I'd become. You won't bury yours. Yours will ring until it splits you." He turned and his face vanished, peeled away like a mask, revealing nothing underneath, just fog and teeth. I returned to the inn, hoping for silence, but instead I found the caller's room. It hadn't been there before. 3rd floor, door 331. I didn't have to knock. The door was already open. Inside, a chair, a mirror, and a wall covered in bells. Each was tagged. Caller 002, caller 019, caller 076, caller 331. Mine. I approached my bell, smaller than the others, duller, humming a sickly tone that never resolved. Underneath it, a message had been scrawled into the wall. "Second call approaching. You will know them by the place they refuse to leave. Bring them across, or take their place." I sat in the chair, stared at the mirror. My reflection looked tired, thinner. My eyes had sunk deeper into their sockets. But something else had changed. My shadow. It moved when I didn't. It twitched, watched me, smiled. The mirror fogged with frost from the inside. Words appeared. "There are more of you than you think." I left the room just before dawn. The fog was already pushing against the floorboards, but this time, it didn't try to enter. It opened, like curtains, revealing a path. I didn't think. I followed. The path was familiar, but not from Gallowmere, from my past. The school I grew up in, the bridge I once stood on during the worst night of my life. My father's old truck, still rusted, parked beneath a memory I never told anyone about. The fog wasn't showing me the way. It was peeling me open, layer by layer. And at the end of the path, I found her. I didn't recognize her at first, but the moment she turned, I remembered. We'd never spoken, not really. She was just a girl from my college dorm, always alone, always reading. And one night I saw her crying in the stairwell. I walked past her, didn't stop, didn't ask, didn't call anyone. 3 days later, she was found in the woods, hanged from a low branch. Her name was Lena, and now she stood in front of me. Still that same age, still holding the same red scarf she'd worn that week. She looked up. Her eyes were made of bell metal now, hollow, polished, and vibrating. "You heard me back then," she said. "Didn't you?" I couldn't speak. "You knew I needed someone." She took a step closer. "I rang. You heard it." She held out her hand. In it, a bell, tarnished, cracked, heron. "This is your second call," she said softly. "Call me properly, or stay here in my place." Behind her, a noose swayed gently from a tree that hadn't been there a moment before. She began to fade. The bell in my pocket rang once, without my touch. I looked at the cracked bell in her palm, and I took it. The world rippled, and I screamed. When I woke, I was back in the caller's room. The bell under my name now glowed faintly red. The inscription had changed. Second call completed. Subject accepted. Echo integrated. Stability declining. Third call pending. I stared at my reflection. It stared back. But it wasn't mimicking me anymore. It was waiting for me to copy it. I looked down at the coin the lipless woman had given me. It had changed too. New names added. Not scratched in. Burned. One of them was Lena. Another I didn't recognize, but I had a feeling I would soon. That night I asked the innkeeper what happened after the 7th call. She didn't lie. No riddles, no half answers. Just this. "You stop calling." "Because you're done?" "No," she said. "Because by then, the bells call for you." "What happens to my body?" She looked down at her hands, pulled back her sleeves. Beneath her skin, bells. Dozens of them. Some fused to bone. Some still ringing. Softly. Endlessly. "I don't remember where I put my name," she whispered. "It might still be here, or maybe someone rang it." She smiled. "Maybe you." I wanted to scream, but instead, I nodded. And that night, I dreamed of Lena again. Only this time, she wasn't crying. She was smiling. And behind her, 1,000 others waited for me to remember. By the time the third call approached, I had learned not to sleep. Sleep in Gallowmere doesn't restore. It doesn't heal. It opens doors, windows, wounds, and not always yours. Most nights I stayed in the caller's room, staring at the wall of bells. Some were glowing faintly, red, green, or black. Some were cracked. Some were gone. Some rang with no sound at all. Mine pulsed now, slow, heavy, the kind of weight you feel before a storm arrives. I didn't know who the third would be, but I knew the kind of person it would choose. Someone I forgot. Someone I failed. That's how the bells work. They don't reach for who you love or miss. They reach for the unfinished, the unresolved, the ones whose names you erased, even if only in thought. On the morning of the third, I found a knife on my pillow. Not sharp, not modern. Old, rusted, bone-handled, its blade etched with tiny bells, each worn down by centuries of use. Attached to the handle was a note, for when the echo does not want to come. 3 bells made, 1 silence required. No signature, no scent, just the weight of inevitability. I left the room and went out into the town. The fog parted for me now. I didn't even have to try. Buildings moved out of my path. The street bent to my feet like a river following the line of my breath. At first it felt like power, but I understood what it really was. Permission. I was no longer a visitor. I was part of the function. The chapel stood in the town's southern end, but it hadn't been there the day before. Gallowmere reshapes itself around need, and someone needed to be called. Inside the chapel, the pews had long since collapsed. The stained glass windows had gone gray, not shattered, just emptied, like the light had walked away. At the altar stood a single figure, hands clasped, head bowed. I knew him instantly, not from memory, from reflection, because he looked like me, only younger, thinner, eyes too bright. He turned, and it all came back. We were roommates once, first year of college, assigned by chance. He was quiet, polite, always working on something in notebooks he never let me read. Drawings, symbols, circles that bled into each other. We didn't speak much. I didn't pay attention. He left mid-year. No warning. Campus, police, found his dorm empty, the walls covered in black marker. His name was Reed. I never looked into what happened to him, never followed up, never even wondered where he went. He looked at me now with that same expression I'd only half remembered. Not anger, not sorrow, disappointment. "You were there," he said. I swallowed. "I didn't know." "You knew I was slipping. You saw it. You smelled it. The rot." He stepped forward. His feet didn't touch the ground. "But you turned up your music, locked the door, slept through the sound of the rope tightening. You didn't think I mattered." Behind him something began to rise. Not a bell. A weight hung in the air like gravity itself, waiting to drop. Reed extended his hand. A bell floated above it, shimmering with ink. "I could stay here," he said. "I could keep ringing." I felt the knife in my coat, heavy against my ribs. Or I could take him. Make the call. Finish what I left undone. But if I rang this bell, I knew what it would do. It would pull me closer to the edge. The space between the ringer and the rung was narrowing. And I didn't know how many more I could call before I split completely. Still, I took the bell, and I rang it. Reed screamed, not in pain, in relief. His body bent backward, his mouth opened too wide, and from it a sound poured out like ink, thick, wet, filled with syllables no living throat should shape. He folded inward, collapsed, and was gone. The chapel emptied. Light returned. The pews were whole again, but carved into the altar now. 3:31. Third call complete. Echo status unstable. Splintering imminent. I didn't stay. I ran. Back at the inn, the others were waiting. They sat around the fire. Some of them now wore masks. Some had no mouths. One had no eyes, but still watched me. "You called Reed," one of them said. His voice sounded like wind caught in wires. I nodded. "Third calls are dangerous," another whispered. That's when the ringer begins to ring. "What does that mean?" I asked. A third voice spoke, and it came from nowhere. "It means next time, you won't need a bell." They all turned away, and I knew what they meant, because in my hand, where the bell had been, there was nothing. And yet, I could still hear it, ringing, from inside my chest. The caller's room had changed. It always does after a call. New bells lined the wall, some faint, some glowing hot. Mine now pulsed with a golden light. The mark beneath it updated. Third call complete. Caller identified as self-propelled. Awaiting fourth without need of token. No instruction, no message, no guide. Just the silent understanding. I was beginning to echo back. That night, I dreamed of Lena and Reed, but not as I remembered them, as they might have been, laughing, alive, whole, sitting in a place I'd never seen, a vast green field beneath a black sun. They were waiting for me, but not in a welcoming way, in the way you wait for someone who owes you. When I woke, my mouth was bleeding, my teeth were loose, the mark on my palm had split, and in the mirror, I didn't see myself, just the bells, hundreds of them, swinging silently, waiting for the next name. There was no more time. Not in the way clocks understand it, not in the way hearts beat. In Gallowmere, time was a chime, and the space between bells had finally run out. The night after the third call, I stopped hearing the others. The whispers in the fog, the soft ringing of distant echo bells, the murmurs of the called gathered in the inn's common room like moths orbiting their own smoke. Everything went silent, and then the silence itself became unbearable. It wasn't absence, it was anticipation, the calm between inhale and scream, the hush before the final name is spoken. The fog no longer moved, because there was nowhere left for it to go. Gallowmere had folded in on itself. Every path now led to one place. Every road curved like ribs around a central hollow I hadn't yet seen. Not because I hadn't tried, because it hadn't allowed me. Until now. It began in the caller's room. My bell was gone. Completely. No mark on the wall. No light. No number. Just a hole where it had once pulsed. The others wouldn't meet my eyes. The innkeeper wouldn't speak. And the town began to hum again. That low, endless note I'd first heard the day I arrived. But now it wasn't just in the walls. It was in me. My chest vibrated. My teeth ached. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. And then, in my mind, not spoken, not written, just known. Come to the hollow. It's time to be named again. The hollow lay beneath Gallowmere, not under it, within it. Like the town was just a skin, and the hollow was the heart. The entrance was where the inn had once stood. Now a ragged hole of stone and root and blood, pulsing faintly with light that had no warmth. I didn't need a guide. The bells were calling, but not to me, through me. I was no longer the one ringing. I was the clapper. I descended. The path narrowed. Stone turned to bone. Bone to something black and soft and writhing. The walls weren't built. They'd grown. At intervals, bells hung from chains made of hair, each swaying in no wind. Some cracked, some shattered, some full. Every time I passed one, it tolled without sound. But I felt it. In my gut. In my memories. They each played a note of my own unraveling. At the end of the path, the seventh bell. It wasn't suspended, It wasn't shaped. It was alive. A mass of knotted, ringing flesh rising from the center of the hollow. Vast, towering. Its surface shimmered with faces. Not etched, alive, moving, screaming silently, and in the center of it all, my reflection, bound in glass, eyes open, watching me arrive, waiting. It spoke with my voice, not aloud, but deep in the marrow. You've made your calls. You've summoned the forgotten. Now it's your turn. I fell to my knees, not in worship, in surrender, because I understood. The seventh bell isn't rung. It becomes. It consumes. It turns the ringer into the ring. The reflection began to fracture, piece by piece. Memories spilling into the hollow like oil slicks. The first call, Lena, waiting in the fog with stitched eyes and outstretched hands. Reed, his echo still clinging to my lungs like smoke. The innkeeper silent and smiling, bleeding bell light from her teeth. The fog, the road, the sign that shouldn't have existed. The well, the child at my window. The fourth bell, the one that never stopped. Caller 002076189. All the names, all the bells. I saw everyone, and I saw what I had become. Not a survivor, not a victim, a carrier, a vessel, the one who rang, the one who woke. And then I understood the last truth. There never was a Gallowmere. Not really. There was only the sound, and the ones who could hear it, and the places the sound needed to grow. The reflection shattered completely, and something crawled out of the glass. Me, but after. Me, reshaped. Tall, thin, draped in funeral black, hands stained with calluses from ringing things that should never have been awakened. No face, just a bell for a head. It stepped forward, embraced me, and whispered the last word I'd ever need. Now. I became the sound. It didn't hurt. It ended. Like a book closing over the final sentence. Like breath turning into fog, then vanishing. There was no inn, no room, no road. Just the echo. Forever. And then, a knock. Software. 3 times. Someone heard. Someone answered. And through my newly forged mouth, a bell no longer made of brass but of memory, I whispered their name. Epilogue. If you ever find yourself driving down an old road with no name, if the radio cuts out and the air grows heavy, if you see a wooden sign half rotted by time that reads something like Dross Hollow or Gallowmere, if the fog falls too fast to be natural, if your GPS says turn left when no road appears, don't. Keep going. Even if it feels like you've been called. Even if your hands turn the wheel without your permission. Even if something familiar waits just beyond the mist. Because it's not a town. Not really. It's a bell. And it's always waiting for someone new to ring it. The end. Thank you for listening to The Night Reader. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt lost in the dark, remember, you're not alone. The stories we carry are what connect us. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment letting me know. Where are you listening from? And what story do you carry? Until next time, keep your light close and your shadows closer.